right. Hey, everyone, and welcome back to Mapping Bigfoot. Tonight, I have a really exciting guest. We've gone back and forth on Instagram about different Bigfoot stuff and comments and maps I've put up and hunting and all kinds of things. It occurred to me as we were going back and forth, and I've seen all the stuff that he's done, that he'd be a really good guest. And tonight's guest is Austin Legg. He's a seasoned backcountry hunter, global adventurer, and Bigfoot. I'm going to call him a Bigfoot researcher because he's definitely out noticing things in the wilderness that a lot of us probably miss, right? So we're going to hopefully learn a lot from him too. He's gained national recognition recently as a world-renowned outdoor/survival expert and backcountry hunter on the television series Extracted on Fox. So we'll talk a little bit about that, hopefully, how he got into that situation. I'll call it a situation. And then in addition to his television appearances, Austin has been featured on all kinds of podcasts. Really great guy to hear on the podcast, including a lot where he's discussed his experiences and insights as an adventurer, hunter, and his Bigfoot experiences, which we're definitely going to get into on the show. Austin maintains an active presence on social media platforms such as Instagram and Threads, where he shares his adventures and expertise with a wide audience. Beyond his hunting adventures and Bigfoot research, I'm going to put it in quotes, we'll find out what you're really doing in the field when we get into the interview. Austin is an advocate for the Second Amendment and has worked in marketing and communications within the firearms industry. Through his diverse experiences and platforms, Austin Legg continues to contribute to the fields of Bigfoot research, outdoor exploration, and advocacy. And without any further ado, I'm going to bring him in from the green room here. Welcome. Long time coming. Welcome to the show, Austin. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, let's rock and roll, man. I'm excited for this.
Me too. Let's jump right into it. I know I'm going to promote the heck out of this when we get it out there. So there's a ton of people that are watching. They're going to have a lot of questions. And the first thing I want to get into would be your Bigfoot experience. This is a Bigfoot podcast. We were talking about it in the green room. I'm going to get ahead of myself and let's jump into that. Let's start running right out of the gate. So if you don't mind, let's go for it.
Okay, I'll tell you, man, I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was 2011. I was newly married. I was with my wife. Had this story taken place just by myself, I could understand why people would question it, right? But my wife was there, who's the most honest and trustworthy person on this planet. And the two of us were driving from Southern Nevada, Las Vegas, up through the wilderness of Nevada, where there's absolutely nothing except for the highway, up through Elko and on our way to Boise, where we live. And so I'd been driving for a while. I started getting tired. It's getting late. It's around midnight. And we decided to switch drivers. So now my wife is driving. I'm sitting in the passenger seat as we're cruising down the highway. Now, I don't know if you've ever done this stretch of highway, but there is nothing, right? It's this valley. There's mountains on both sides, but you don't see a house. You don't see a car. You don't see anything for hours. And so we're cruising down this highway. And my wife's driving, and I was in and out, sleeping here and there, but never really passed all the way out. And I hear my wife say, "What is that?" And so obviously that catches my attention. And I pop right up, and I'm wide awake, and I instantly see it. I'm like, "What on earth are we looking at?" And probably right on the edge of the high beams, I can see this figure. And when I say right at the edge of the high beams, now keep in mind, we're probably driving 65, 70 miles an hour. And so it's rapidly getting closer, but not just on the edge of the high beams in front of us, but also on the side of us. So it's diagonal to us off the road. And it's moving parallel to the highway. So by the time I notice it, I have a good 10 seconds of being able to see this perfectly high beams on it as we're approaching it, and it's moving away from us, right? So it's moving the same direction as our vehicle. And I can tell you with no doubt in my mind, I couldn't see the outline of a head, neck, shoulders. I couldn't see the outline of a man. I could see the outline of this large figure. And It didn't have a backpack. It didn't have a weapon. It didn't have trekking poles. It's 3 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. And this thing's about 50 yards off the road, just walking through the brush. And it was very dark. Obviously it was dark outside, but the coloring was very dark and it looked very hairy. And so I'm like processing all of this in real time, right? A few seconds go by and I'm taking this all in. And I say to my wife, oh my gosh, what are we looking at? And I think she's like processing the same thing and realizing like, holy cow, are we seeing what we think we're seeing? She starts to slow down. And so now we're a few seconds into this and we're slowing down, and now we're getting a much clearer, better look at this. And it, never turns its head to look at us, just stays walking parallel to the road. And like I said, I very clearly could see that this was a large, and when I say large, we were in at the time her Nissan Sentra, and not a big vehicle. It's a kind of a small car, and this thing, from what I could tell from the angle I had, would absolutely dwarf the size of this vehicle.
Wow.
And so my guess, just if I was from my best deduction, I would say this thing was probably close to 7 feet tall, large, like a very if it were a man, it would be like a Shaquille O'Neal sized man. You know what I mean? Like
Right,
7 feet,
yeah.
like 400 pounds, just huge. And so she starts to slow down and she's, oh my gosh, should I stop? And I'm like, and she asked me, should I stop? And this is the one thing in the story where I don't know if I made the right decision, or I don't know if I would have done it different. But she asks, should I stop? And we're going probably 30 miles an hour at this time. And I say, I think you need to keep going. Okay. Because keep in mind, this is 2011.
Middle of
nowhere. Cell phones aren't great. Middle of nowhere. There's no cell phone service for hours either direction. I don't have a gun in the car because we've been in California and through Nevada, right? So don't have a gun in the car. Cell phones aren't great. Wouldn't have been able to probably get any type of video or anything like that. I'm like, if we stop, what am I gonna do? Be like, hey, over here.
Yeah, and what if it's a ploy, right? You don't really know at that time. You're going with your gut.
You don't know. Yep. She asked me, like, what should I stop? And I'm like, I think you need to keep going. Now, keep in mind, all of this is happening in like a 10 to 12 second. This is pretty quick. And so she keeps going. So we drive past this thing. And then once we pass, I'm like so buzzed and wide awake. And I'm just like, you saw that, right? I'm not dreaming. I'm awake. We both saw that. Austin, 100%. We both saw that. And I said, what do you think it was? And she's like, I hate to say it, but I think that was a Sasquatch. And I was like, Carolee, there's no doubt in my mind that's what I just saw. And here's the thing, man. I had always been someone who wanted Bigfoot to be real. I was on the fence, but I wanted it to be real. And then once I saw that, I'm a big Occam's razor guy, where usually the obvious answer is the correct answer. You do Occam's razor with this. Okay. It wasn't a bear. 99.99% sure it wasn't a hunter. It didn't have a backpack, didn't have a gun, didn't have anything like that. If it was a person, just absolutely massive, wearing a full body hairy ghillie suit, just can't come up with a rational explanation on what it was. Okay,
you didn't pass a parked car where he would have gotten out of, put on his ghillie suit and walked, right? Those are things you would notice.
No flashlight, no headlamp, nothing like. So I hold on to this story for several years. Occasionally it would get brought up amongst me and my wife and whatever, and then I started telling people in my circle, and then I'd tell a few more people, and finally the story starts getting out. Then it's probably, I don't know, 10 years later where I start hearing more and more people tell me that they're seeing things on this stretch of highway in Nevada. And so now all of a sudden I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not as crazy as I sound. And then it was you actually one day shared something, a map of a cave system in Nevada on that stretch of highway, and highlighted the fact that Bigfoot are using these tunnels, these caves, to be able to move around underground, which allows them to pop up in one spot, feed, get water, do whatever, and go back down and go. And so when people tell me like a Bigfoot can't live in that area, it's deserty, it's this, it's that, it's hot, whatever. If you have a tunnel, a cave network where you can be out of the sun, it's cool, you can stay hidden.
Yep.
you only come up at night when it's dark. That is now not outside the realm of possibility, right? If I told you I was 5 miles outside of Las Vegas, I'd have a hard time believing that story. But after
Yeah,
hearing more stories, seeing the maps, having my experience, like, I'm all in.
I get it. I've had my own experience that I've talked about here in Texas, and not to get too much detail into it because I want to hear more from you. I was actually walking out from my tree stand after shooting time with my bow. There was a river bottom to my left, a pasture to my right, and I was walking along a barbed wire fence. And I looked to my left at about my 11 o'clock, and 40 yards out was what I thought was a wild boar. And then it stood up. And I was just like, whoa, like you buffering. And I literally said, whoa. And it squatted back down. And then it stayed there. And I just like you, I look back and I'm like, what should I have done? I said, I see you, just like I'm talking to my kid. And it
Yeah,
stood up, turned, and ran.
yeah,
Got in my truck, locked the doors in my truck. Because if that's a person, I'm in trouble. It's similar to you. That is a massive person. What are they doing out here with no gear, no flashlight? They're running. And it's the reason I bring it up is because there's some parallels in both of our experiences of what we saw. Similar size, it sounds like, very dark. Unlike you, I didn't have anyone with me. I wish somebody was with me to validate what I saw. Because I look back and I'm like, what did I see that? Did I imagine that? But I'm very, and I'll get into this as a hunter, I do know the species out there. I'm familiar with the area. I'm familiar with what's going on out there. I do have, I would say, better than average observation skills and better than average reaction time, perhaps. So, like looking back, I'm confident in what I remember and what I saw, just like I'm sure you are. And that just gives me even more confidence. And ironically, this was after I started the Bigfoot mapping project. So it's one of those things. It's like, all right, sure, the Bigfoot
yeah,
mapping guy had a Bigfoot sighting. What a coincidence. But I
yeah,
swear, I don't care if you believe me or not. This is what happened. And then to hear stories like yours, putting a map out there and helping you come to a conclusion or understanding of what could have happened and supporting evidence of your experience. Hopefully that helps you resolve in a way 14 years later what
yeah,
really was happening out there. And that's the whole come full circle moment of the project and why I want to have you on the show, because that's what the project is all about. You epitomize that really well and you personify the witness side of it. And then you have this vast plethora of experience in the wilderness, at least what I've seen recently. I'm super jealous of, but also like very impressed.
thanks.
You've been all over doing all kinds of hunts for all kinds of, looks like mainly you're going after deer, North America, all the deer species.
Yeah,
I was scrolling through your Instagram before the show, but you've hunted muskox, is that right? And
yep,
all
yep.
kinds of
I've been
other stuff.
yeah, I've been all over the place.
I was looking through
Yeah,
the show and I was like, dang, this guy's seen it all. So I bring that up because I think it's a really good point for people listening to understand what your experience is and why you can say, look, Occam's razor, I've eliminated everything else. I've gone through what the possibilities are, and you have an especially good understanding of probably that region too, of what species are out there. You know, you weren't looking at a moose's butt walking through the woods, which a lot of
yeah,
people might think is Bigfoot if you don't realize how big a moose is, right? But those kinds of things that you're going through your head, you're like, all right, it's not this, it's not a bear, it's not this. What could this? It's not a hunter, and you have this. You look
yeah,
for a firearm, you look for a backpack. You did a mental checklist even when you were buffering the situation, which a lot of people don't do.
yeah. You bring up a really good point, and it's something that I wanted to talk about. Now, I think, and this may hurt some people's feelings, but I think that probably 95% of Bigfoot sightings are a case of misidentification.
I do too.
Because I've been out in the woods almost my whole life, and I live in Idaho, right, in the kind of that Pacific Northwest area where we probably per square mile have the most sightings and probably the biggest population density. I heard Dr. Meldrum one time say that he estimated we had about 200 Sasquatch in Idaho. I take that kind of serious from the fact that if I'm going to put myself out there and say, hey, this is what I saw, I need to be pretty dang certain that's what I saw, right? I have to be able to rule out X, Y, and Z. And
Right.
so I remember one time I was bear hunting. It was spring season, and I was hunting. There's an area called Hell's Canyon, and it separates Oregon and Idaho. It's the deepest canyon, so not the biggest canyon, but the deepest canyon in North America. Absolutely insane country. It is so steep, so thick, just nasty. And so I had hiked back into some area in Hell's Canyon, and I was hunting back there. And I remember I'm glassing, I'm looking through my binoculars, and I'm scanning around. I'm looking for bears, and I see this bear step out. Now, it's on all fours, it's walking, but the thing is just gigantic. One of the biggest bears I've ever seen on in real life. And I bust out my spotting scope, right? So now I go from a little set of 10 by 50s to my big 80 millimeter spotter. And now I can really get in close and get a look at this thing. Now, as I do that, this bear stands up and puts its back on a tree and starts doing this and itching its back and scratching its back and rubbing up and down on this tree. I had the thought that if a less experienced person were to see what I am seeing right now, they would 100% say I am looking at a Sasquatch, because I'm looking at a bear that's probably close to 7 feet tall, that's probably 250, 280 pounds, a very large bear for Idaho, and it's standing upright and it's scratching its
It's,
back like a human
it's got a
type
massive
behavior.
head, no neck.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yes. It's partially obscured by this big tree. And so I'm having this conversation with myself of, I know what this is, but would
Hmm.
other people who see just this know what this is? And as I start to see more and more photos and videos online, I'm not saying that I'm a skeptic, because I'm committed, right? But I am a skeptic towards a lot of what I see, because I want other people to have Bigfoot sightings. I want them to believe in this, but I want them to believe in it for the right reasons, and not because, like you said, they're seeing a moose's butt, because that's one I've heard
Right.
too.
What you just talked about is a great segue to really the premise for this podcast and why I have people like you on as guests. Not only do I want to learn about your experience and when you saw Bigfoot, but I want to dig into what we can absorb from you in our conversation, skills and important aspects of your expertise. So I guess if we can rewind a little bit back, because we jumped
Yeah,
into the Bigfoot sighting first, but if we can rewind back to something you said about you've been in the outdoors your whole life. And so have I. I grew up in the East Coast in New York. So my outdoor experience is probably a little bit different. You're much more used to very rugged terrain, and I'm used to like Adirondacks, Catskills, the Hudson Valley region in New York is where I'm from. Our outdoor experience and skills are probably vastly different. Your ability to hike at elevation is much better than mine, I'm sure, especially because I live at sea level in Houston. That's what I want to touch on and ask you about is how long have you been in the outdoors? What skills did you develop over time that you think are important for people to really focus on if they're going to be serious about being out in the field? Now, this is not really exclusive to Bigfoot research. A lot of what I like to talk about is safety in the field, how to be skillful in the field, good gear, preparedness, all the way through even first aid, right? And safety. Those are things that I guess it's a twofold question. One, what really got you into being an
yeah,
outdoorsman, survivalist, skilled in the wilderness? And then two, what are the basics or the top skills you would recommend that people really hone so that they can get the most out of their experience in the field, right?
yeah. That's a great question. I moved to Idaho when I was, I think, 13, maybe 14. So it's been about 22 years now. And I moved from Kentucky. So, yeah, in Kentucky, I didn't spend nearly as much time outside. But when you move to Idaho, now all of a sudden you're in, this is it. That's what we do. And so
Right.
it was like, okay, time to learn how to fish and go hunting and all these fun new bushcraft and things that I'd never even thought of as being like a skill or a hobby or something I wanted to do. And so a lot of it was like finding a good mentor. And then a lot of it was just trial and error and being self taught. It took me a really long time of trial and error and screwing up and having bad experiences before I started getting the confidence to say, yeah, I think I'm ready to go out on my own and go hunting or go fishing or go camping or backpacking or whatever. But once I did get to that point, then all of a sudden it was like, okay, this is fun. Now I
Hmm.
have these skills. I'm confident in them. I can use them. Now this is a playground. It's not something I necessarily have to be afraid of. This is fun. And so that's what got me into it. And yeah, it's just exploded from there. Your question about what can people do, I think that's important, right? Because what I see a lot of in the hunting industry specifically is people will get really excited to go hunting for the first time.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
they'll go out and they'll buy new boots and a new gun and a backpack and gear, and then they'll buy a bunch of new stuff and they'll go out, and a lot of times they're out for a week. Like if they come out west, they'll take a week off of work and they'll go hunting. And elk hunting is a big one. People from the East Coast come to the West Coast, they go elk hunting or mule
Oh
deer
yeah,
hunting or whatever,
guilty
and
as
they're here for a
charged.
week.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe they either don't see anything or they're not successful, and now all of a sudden the whole thing's a bust, and they lose confidence, and it's, oh, screw it, I'm just gonna stay at home and hunt the family farm or whatever, and that's fine. But what I want to tell people is you have to be ready to be unsuccessful or to fail or to have a bad season or to have whatever happen, and then just either be able to adapt and overcome and keep going, or just know that, hey, these things happen. They happen all the time. For me, it was years of terrible experiences, and I just kept going out. And really, that is true with backpacking. The first time you go hiking, your legs are going to hurt. You're going to get blisters on your feet. You're not going to sleep well the first time you sleep in the dirt. Like, it's not going to be that fun, right? But it hopefully is that type 2 type of fun where once you get back and you think about, man, the views were incredible, like the night sky was something I've never seen before. You start thinking about the other things besides how much this part of it sucked. You start thinking about all these other things, and that's when you say, like, okay, I want to do that again. I want to go
Once you
100%.
get past that, I've never been happier. Like, aside from when
Yes.
I'm with my family, let me say that I've never been happier than when I'm out in the middle of nowhere with nothing around me. Like you said, looking at the night sky, breathing in the crisp air with sore legs, up high,
Mhm.
and just dirty and stinky as hell. I've never been happier. Yeah.
And so I think how to get there is important. Getting into the outdoors can be a barrier of entry in and of itself, because you do need to have a certain amount of gear or some basic skills. And so what I would tell people is decide what you want to do, whether it's backpacking or hunting or hiking or whatever. Decide what you want to do, and then start small and just over time scale up into it. People get really overwhelmed when they feel like they have to go out and buy all of the things all at once. And so, man,
Right.
I accumulated my hunting gear over 20 years. I just add things to it every year.
I buy used gear
But
sometimes too. There's great
yeah,
websites out there
oh,
for that all the
100%.
time.
Facebook Marketplace, oh, all day. Maybe year one, invest in a decent backpack and a good pair of boots. If you start there with a good pair of boots and a decent backpack, man, go explore, get outside, go hike, check out a new trail, whatever. But yeah, I think gear is important. I've been a kind of a gear advocate for a long time because I think that quality gear does make a difference. And people argue with me all the time about this, but here's my thought. Quality gear is what's going to make the difference between a little rainstorm ruining your trip because you're soaking wet and cold, or you put on a decent rain jacket and say, yeah, we'll wait this thing out for 3 hours, and when it's done, we take it off and we keep going. Gear makes a huge difference, not only right then and there on the mountain, but how you think back through afterwards. And I do think you invest in quality gear and you invest in it slowly over time. I think that's important.
You touch on gear, and I think in your story about when you saw the bear in Hell's Canyon, one of the key things that I wanted to talk about, because I think you're expert in this, is optics. A lot of what I talk about, I've noticed in Bigfoot research is really parallel to hunting. And Essentially, you are hunting if you're out there looking for Bigfoot in a way. I think that a lot of people, optics, trail cameras, the technology in general, but first I'll talk about optics. There is a big learning curve for good optics and how to use, even how to use binoculars properly, and what magnification, what power is good for what situation. So if you can give advice on binos, spotting scope, what your preference is, when, how you use either, especially out west is a key element in a hunt. I would love to hear your opinion. I'm sure my listeners would too, because glassing and patience are a big part of finding what's out there. And I think a lot of Bigfoot researchers in particular don't focus on sitting still and watching, but I think highlighting the importance of patience and how to use optics properly when you're in the field is really a good topic. To be successful on a hunt, you really have to. I would love to hear your advice about that and share
Yeah.
that with the listeners.
Yeah, I think one of the things that gets overlooked a lot is your accessibility to those optics. Okay, so one thing I would recommend is if you're going to carry a set of optics, have them accessible, whether it's on like a belt pouch or a bino harness. Chest packs are really popular right now, but get something to where you can have accessibility to the binoculars, because a lot of times what happens is you'll see something out of the corner of your eye, or you'll see something across the canyon or moving through the brush or through the creek bottom or whatever, and it happens really fast. And the absolute worst thing is you have to take your backpack off and you're digging through your stuff trying to find your binoculars, and then when you come back and you're looking for it, you can't find it. So my recommendation is, yes, get a pair of binoculars and then have them accessible while you're hiking, while you're sitting, while you're eating lunch. Have them with you. That way you can use them. There's all kinds of binoculars out there. A good rule of thumb that I've always followed is buy the best pair of binoculars for your budget, right? I know that's a very general rule, but what that means is if you can afford a $400 pair of binos, get the $400 pair of binos. That's not the place where I would skimp on my budget, because good binos do make a difference. What you're going to see in the difference between maybe $1,000 pair of binoculars and a $200 pair of binoculars are at low light situations. You're going to see a huge difference. So in that first 15 to 30 minutes of daylight in the morning, and same thing in the evening, the dawn and dusk situations, you're going to be able to pick out things a lot more clearly. And then also at further distances, you're going to be able to see things a lot more defined and a lot more clear depending on the quality of glass that you have. If you can afford the $1,000 binos, they're worth it in most cases. Now, I like a bigger set of binoculars. I use a set of Leopolds that are 10 by 50s. So 10 by 42 is a really common size. If you were to go out and pull hunters, I would bet probably 75% of hunters use a pair of 10 by 42s. That means the magnification in the binoculars is 10x what the human eye is. And then the second number is the diameter of the lens at the end.
The lens, yep.
So that tells you how much light it's going to allow to come in. So the 10 by 50s is a little bit bigger lens. And so I am able to gather more light in those low light situations. And so I have found that with 10 by 50s, I'm able to stay out 5 to 10 minutes longer and see more than I would with 10 by 42s. That's really important from a hunting perspective, because animals are so active in those periods just before sunrise and sunset.
Crepuscular.
Yeah, 100%. And that's my thoughts on binoculars, man. I spend the money, have them accessible. Now with a spotting scope, I'm a little particular about spotting scopes, because I don't know if you've ever tried, but if you sit down and try and look in a spotting scope for an extended period of time, it is exhausting. It will cause so much eye strain, and it'll give you a headache. It makes my head hurt, like physically hurt.
Yeah, I've experienced that because I use not a spotting scope a lot, but I take a lot of wildlife photography. And I'm always looking, and I find that I'm like almost dizzy, right? Because I've got one eye shut all the time looking through the viewfinder. And I'd imagine it's very similar looking through a spotting scope, because it's just like you're hunched over and you're looking through with one eye shut the whole time. I definitely believe that.
Yep. So what I would recommend is I use my binoculars for nearly all of my glassing. 99% of the time when I'm looking for things, even things 2 miles away, I'm using binoculars. I'm always scanning slowly. I'm putting binoculars on a tripod and I'm picking things apart. I'm looking under trees and behind rocks. When I see something that needs a closer look, is when
Mm.
I put my spotting scope on my tripod. So I will take mental note of things. I'll say, okay, I need to like double check that. I need to look there. And then I will go back and do it. If I see something, I'm like, oh yeah, there's movement. That is definitely an animal. I can't tell what it is. Or there's a deer. Let me see if there's antlers on it, type of thing. So I will use my spotting scope to verify and get a closer look at things, because that's what ultimately is going to save my eyes and save me from getting a headache. One of the other tools that I would really recommend is, there's all different types of these on the market right now. The one that I specifically use, it's called the All-In Adapter, OLIN. If you're going to use a spotting scope, I would highly recommend getting one of these, but it's basically a magnetic adapter for your cell phone.
Oh,
And
nice.
so all you do is you put your phone on camera or video or whatever, and then you just set your phone on your spotting scope, and then you can take videos of things. I videotape the shots when I'm hunting, because it's nice to verify that I made a good shot and see where the
Absolutely.
animal went. I do it all the time with my kids when I want to show them something. I'll put the phone on there, pull
Oh,
up the
yeah.
video, and I'll say, "Hey, look,
That's great.
that. I'm looking at that boulder, and if you go below the boulder, there's an elk." And then I'll pull it up on the camera. And I'll say, "Okay, this is what you're looking for. Now you
Yeah.
find it in your binoculars, right?" So I
Yeah,
use
and
it
you're
as a
teaching them,
tool,
yeah.
because glassing really is a skill that you have to learn. It's not something that somebody with an untrained set of eyes can just pick up binos and be like, "Oh yeah, there's deer and elk all over the place." Like, no, it is
Exactly.
very much a skill that you learn. Yeah.
So, I've got my binoculars, the best ones I can afford. I'm out, I'm glassing, and I'm now what are some aspects of when I'm looking through those binos or that spotting scope, how can I determine what are things that are flags that would say, "Hey, that's something sticking out there. I want to check that out further." Or like you said, movement or other things that people might be able to key in on when they're looking through
Yeah,
the
for sure.
binos and trying to digest and the finer details that they're looking at.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the big things you can do is eliminate your own movement. Okay, so you can grab a pair of binoculars and look out your backyard and look as far away as you can, as far away as you can see at a stop sign or something, and just stand there and hold your binos and look at it and look at how much shaking and movement there is, and try and hold that for a minute. All of that movement makes a difference, because then brace yourself up against the door of your vehicle, or brace your elbows onto your knees and sit down on your butt and see how much movement you eliminate. And so when I talk about glassing being a skill, it is a skill in the sense of what you're looking for, but it's also a skill on how you physically do it, right? You have to
Yeah.
eliminate that movement, and then you have to learn not to just jump around and haphazardly look. The people I know who glass the best are very slow and very deliberate. So I like to put my binoculars on a tripod and I will glass in a grid. I'll go work my way close. So I start close to myself in case there's anything 100 yards away that maybe I just missed. Because that happens, or a bear
Oh,
or an elk
absolutely.
or something just walks out of the brush below me 100 yards away. So I start close and then I scan my way up, and then I go across and I scan back down, and I turn it into a grid. And once I grid out that whole section, I'll work my way back. And then when I've covered that grid section, I move to the next grid, right? And I break up what I can see into these grids so I can make sure I cover everything. Now, what I'm looking for is pretty much the simplest way to put it is I'm looking for something that's out of place. Okay? I'm looking for something that's out of place. That can be movement, right? Movement's out of place. And if you're looking at a forest and something is moving, like, that's weird. What is it?
That's yeah.
So I'm looking for movement. I'm looking for color, right? So if you see something that's bright red, for example, like, there's generally not things that are bright red on a deciduous mountainside, a pine tree forest. And so I'm like, okay, oh, that's a turkey. That's a turkey tom or whatever. So I'm looking for colors. I'm looking for movements. I'm looking for shapes, things like that that are out of place. And that's generally how I see most of the things that I'm looking for. Because you take bears, for example, I do a lot of bear hunting, and bears are so interesting because they, more than any other animal, they will appear and disappear faster than anything, which doesn't make a ton of sense because it's this giant black
Right.
thing that doesn't really fit in. But their ability to like fit under logs and fit behind rocks and go under brush, and they just disappear so fast. And so
Interesting.
I'm constantly looking, and then I see that moving black object, and that sets off a red flag that, okay, that doesn't belong there. So yeah, that's my rule of thumb. I'm looking for things that don't fit in, that don't belong.
Interesting. Speaking of things that don't belong, humans generally don't belong, modern humans, in
Yeah.
the wilderness for the most part.
Yeah.
One of my other questions, and I think this goes right along with Bigfoot research. I'm going to circle back to Bigfoot. We've talked on hunting and hunting skills, but they all contribute to Bigfoot research. It's more of an opinion, advice question. I think crashing through the brush, doing Bigfoot whoops and hollers and knocking on doing tree knocks and things in a non-strategic way, obviously calling for deer and elk, you have to perfect the call, you have to understand the behavior, you can get a response. Personally, and I'm going to catch flack for this, for saying this out loud, I think that stealth and concealment should be a priority in Bigfoot research if you're going into the field. But I'm biased. I'm a hunter, and I've seen results with that. I'd be curious about your opinion on some researchers' approach when it comes to doing whoops and hollers and hoping for a response, and then tree knocks and all those things. And then second to that, I'd be curious about your advice for concealing not only yourself, your body, but I'm also a big proponent of scent control. I really think if you're looking for Bigfoot, or any animals, but you inspired this question when you mentioned bears. A bear can wind you 800 yards away, right? Like easy.
Oh, a mile away. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
for real.
amazing.
Yeah. If you want to get close to anything that has maybe that sense, you need to conceal yourself, not only camouflage, but also scent control. So it's a two opinion part and then advice following that up. If you're willing to give your opinion, I won't put you on the spot, but I have a
No,
feeling
thank you.
you
That's
already
a
did.
question.
So
No, I love this question, and I think you're spot on. I agree with you. I think a lot of what we see on TV with the whoops and the knocks and a lot of that stuff is just entertainment, right? It's giving the audience something. Because how exciting is it to watch someone sit in glass for 4 hours? That's not
and creep
exciting.
through the
Like,
woods,
how
right?
do we
Yeah.
make a TV show? Yeah, how do we make a TV show out of that? But what I can tell you is, in my opinion, we're talking about a species with 200 in Idaho. Idaho is one of the biggest, rugged, most remote states. In terms of the lower 48, it is the most rugged state. Um,
Absolutely.
and we're talking
Absolutely.
about looking for 200 of these. So the idea that we're going to go out and just bang some sticks on trees and call and we're going to see one, I find to be a little far fetched. Now, do incidental sightings occur? 100%. Look at mine. I saw mine driving on the side of the road in Nevada.
Right.
So I'm
I don't
not
want to
saying
come across
incidental
as like,
sightings don't.
yeah,
Yeah, that's what I mean. I know they can happen. But if you wanted to put yourself in the position for the highest probability of success, I would agree with you that you need to control the things you can control. You can control where you position yourself. So if you're sitting on the top of a ridge so that you're skylined, anything can see you from anywhere. So when you talk
right.
about concealment, yes, I fully agree. Get a camouflage jacket, get a camouflage hat, sit somewhere where you have some brush around you, maybe some brush in front of you, you have a tree behind you, some things that break up your outline. I think that's important. And then, yeah, same thing with the wind. pay attention to the wind. It costs a couple dollars to get a little wind checker. It's just a little tube that you can squeeze, and it puts a little puff of like baby powder up in the air.
Hmm.
And then you can see which way the wind is blowing. Use that to your advantage. You want to position
Yeah.
yourself, like you said, in the highest probability places for success. And that does include, what you can see, what you can smell.
Animals in general, wildlife, deer, I think are excellent at this, and people don't give them enough credit. Wildlife can pattern humans just as much, if not better, than we can pattern them. Learning the most about everything that's out there can only help you in your research. What's endemic to the area? So, are there
Yep.
coyotes, bears, hogs? Are there deer? What's the behavior? What's the flora like out there? What kind of forest are you in? Is it deciduous or is it evergreen? What's the food sources out there? All these things contribute to a successful population being able to sustain itself in that area. So, if it's Bigfoot you're looking for, determine all of the food, shelter, cover, water, right? Those are the things that you need to,
Yes.
those are the
I was going to say
ingredients
that.
you need to look for. You can identify where Bigfoot would most likely be and put yourself in the best position. And when you're there, you take your advice and you say, all right, I'm here. I'm going to glass. I'm going to look for movement. I'm going to look for what sticks out. I'm going to conceal myself so I'm not skyline. They can't see my silhouette at the top of the mountain. I'm going to control my scent, pay attention to the wind, all those kinds of things that you can do to put yourself in a better position. And then when you've done all that, understand how Bigfoot may behave, right? Try to think like the animal. This is obviously a very intelligent creature who is probably
Yes.
thinking the same things. How do I conceal myself? How do I cover my scent? How do I avoid confrontation? How do I avoid being seen? It's much more intelligent than a bear or a deer. So you have to up your game basically if you really want to be successful. That's what I really want to get out of this podcast and send through to these folks listening or through their headphones. And I think you are a great guest for that because you've done it, right? You have proof positive that you can do that and be successful at it by your hunting background. I want to throw the question back to you. Out of everything we've talked about, we completely ignored the outline, which is great because it's a really good conversation. Is there anything that you think would be valuable for somebody in the audience, knowing that they are really listening to get the most information about A, your experience with Bigfoot, and B, how to improve their arsenal for research and maybe incorporate some skills that they might need or want to learn?
Yeah, I love that second question because that is something I wanted to touch on. I had a family friend who, not had, he's still alive. I have a family friend who worked for the Forest Service for about probably close to 25 years. And his job was to go out and bid on these large tracts of timber for the Forest Service. And so they would survey the whole thing and then strike a deal to go out and log these tracts of timber. And I remember when he went to Washington, he would always get excited because he is a fellow Bigfoot man as well. And he would get excited to go to Washington because he would say things like, "Man, when I get up into the Washington area, where I don't know if you've been to parts of Western Washington, but it is
Oh,
a
yeah,
true rainforest. It's so insane."
absolutely. You can
And
step
he
10
would
feet
get
off
so
that trail and
excited.
be lost. Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
100%. He would get so excited because he would be like, I'm putting myself in a position to potentially see something. And he had all kinds of amazing stories. And I remember he told this one where a wealthy family had died, the husband and wife had died, and they left their estate to the state of Washington. And so the state of Washington decided that there was a section that they were going to log and turn into this endowment land. So keep in mind, this is private property. It was owned by a very elderly couple with no kids, no posterity, anything like that. So this ground hadn't been touched for nobody knew. Like nobody had any idea when the last time that people had gone out and checked out this area. And so when he went out there, he said that they saw like multiple beds that were basically
Oh,
made
wow.
from similar to what he described it similar to what a bird's nest would be. Obviously, much bigger in these bigger logs and bigger limbs and things in these nests. And he was like, they were on the ground, and we saw multiple of them, not just one or two. We found multiple nests in this area. And I was like, well, what'd you do? He's like, oh, dude, we called some people and told them. And this is where the story gets fuzzy for me. And so I don't want to speak out of turn, but something along the lines of whoever they called, they came out and they photographed, and they actually
Hmm.
like put a pause on logging this area. Now, I don't know who these people are. I don't know if it was University of Washington or just like some hobbyists, right? I don't know. So that's why the story gets a little vague.
That's
But I mean, this came directly from him to me. And so he saw this. And so I always took that as such a good piece of advice. Now, not everyone's going to have access to Western Washington. Not everyone's going to have
right.
access to private land. But the piece of advice that I took from that is don't necessarily stick to the populated area where there's a trail with dirt bikes and four-wheelers and horses, because like you said, I agree. I think we are talking about a very intelligent species that has been able to remain largely hidden for hundreds of years.
At
I would
least.
say thousands of years, but there are stories of the Native Americans seeing and interacting with Sasquatch for hundreds of years. So I do think that they had a better understanding of what we're talking about than probably we do. And so I think this is a very intelligent piece. And so the idea that if I was going to put myself in a position to try and see something, I would be getting away from road systems. I would be getting away from trail systems, away from weekend warriors, and getting into area that is a little bit deeper and steeper and more timber and more cover. And all of that goes back to the having good quality gear conversation from earlier, right? You're getting off the beaten path and getting into places where people don't go. So if you're going to do that, do it safely, and then you can come back and tell us about it. But I think that is where you're going to find yourself having more success than not. And then I say that based on Jeff's experience with the Forest Service.
That actually reminds me of the Olympic project. They have a nest site, and it could very well be the one you're describing, right? That it's
What
in
if it
Washington.
is?
It very well could be.
So,
I'm actually going to
so an interesting
inquire to find out.
point from this. Yeah, please do and follow up with me, because he also said that in one of the nests they found animal bones that had teeth marks in it. And
Oh,
that I think it was the University of Washington anthropology department came and actually took those bones, and they were going to study the teeth marks and find out what it was, right? I've come across thousands of bones in the woods, and usually I can tell you like what animal it was depending on how it was killed. I'm like, it's halfway buried, this is probably a mountain lion or
yep.
whatever, right? There's like little things you can do to identify even a dead animal and bones. But for him to tell me that there were like teeth marks in these bones that they couldn't readily just tell you, like, yeah, this is a mountain lion or whatever. That is odd. That's odd. That's
Yeah, and a
evidence to
mountain
me.
lion generally isn't eating something in a nest, right? Like you said,
Yeah.
they bury, go back and eat it, right? And they come back to it. So that's not mountain lion behavior anyway. There's so many things out in the wilderness that people can learn, even just about the region you're in, the species out there, the climate. And I think mastering that, along with a lot of the skills that we've talked about, and then finding your kit, what gear works for you best and keeps you safest out there. This is
Of course.
your safety when you're off grid, out of contact. That's keeping you alive, essentially, in some of these harsh
Yeah,
conditions,
exactly.
especially if things go wrong. So having a plan, also if things go wrong, letting people know generally where you are. I carry, when I'm out in the middle of nowhere, I have a Zoleo. I have one of those personal beacons. So if I ever get hurt or something, I can send my coordinates to emergency services, and I can check in with my wife. She appreciates that when I'm gone for a week at a time or however long I'm out there. Those are things to think about, especially if you're just getting into this and you're developing your skills. Don't go to the middle of nowhere right away. Baby
Yep,
steps.
for sure.
I think you've highlighted a lot of really good advice. And I think to end on a Bigfoot note, how many times have you had any other experiences or stopped and thought, man, this is a really squatchy place, or anything that stuck out to you as a place you would go back to and you do, if you ever did a quote unquote, I hate to use the word because it's such a popular word in the Bigfoot community, is expedition. If you ever did like a trip to go back and specifically look for Bigfoot, where would you go? But you've been a
Yeah,
lot of places and
yeah.
you've looked for a lot of different species. What area sticks out to you as if you wanted to spend some time and be the most likely to be successful, where would you go?
If I had like my dream of going anywhere, I would actually probably go to Western Washington. My theory is that this Sasquatch species probably did migrate across the Bering Strait and down through Alaska and Western Canada and down into the Pacific Northwest before dispersing out other places, which is why I think we see Sasquatch all the way down to the Florida Everglades and Texas and all over. Like, I do think those are Sasquatch sightings all over the country. But predominantly, I do believe, like I said, the highest density is in the Pacific Northwest area because that's where they came down originally. So if I was going to do one that had it my way, I would go to Western Washington. It's amazing country. It's beautiful. It's thick. It's wet. It's dense. It's all the things that I would want to explore and look for. And I've just heard so many compelling stories from that area. Now, here in Idaho, have I seen things that have made me say, oh boy, like I probably need to take a different second look? I have seen plenty of things that I can't explain. Now, as far as like an actual, like a physical something that I've seen, only that one time. Like when I say physical something, I mean like an actual creature,
Right.
an animal, or that one time in Nevada. But have I seen tracks that I couldn't 100% identify? 100%, absolutely, yes. I absolutely have. Have I smelled things that I can for sure say it's definitely not an elk or a deer? Most likely not a bear. That didn't smell good, but I couldn't place. Yeah, that too. I have just had so many odd things, but again, I can't definitively say yes.
Right.
It was a Sasquatch, right? But yes, odd things have happened. I would say probably once every other year, something just out of place does happen that I can't explain. Now, here in Idaho, we have some massive wilderness areas. And so, if I was going to plan something here in Idaho, I would really like to be out in the spring. And that's the spring's my favorite time to be out because you get all of the spring grasses growing, you get the spring bloom. The
Mm-hmm.
weather's really nice. With those spring grasses is when bears are the most active. You also have migrating deer and elk. So the deer and elk migrate from the lower countries up into the high countries. What that does is it makes the predators become very active as well. Bears are trying to come out of hibernation. They need to eat a lot of grass to get their digestive system moving and start putting on weight. Those mountain lions and stuff, they're also following the migration of deer and elk. And so the spring
Right.
is such a fun time to be outside because you just see so much that even if you go on a Sasquatch expedition for 3 or 4 days and you don't see anything, there's a good chance you could see a mountain lion, a wolf, a bear, deer, elk, like skunks, foxes, all kinds of things. And so I really love the spring, and people generally aren't hunting in the spring, and so you're a lot less
Right.
likely to run into other hunters. There's just less going on because people are still in school. So yeah,
Hmm.
I would say springtime is great. Get out during the spring if you can. It's a beautiful time of year.
The
And then
Bitterroots
yeah,
always
go into
jump
the
out to me. The Bitterroots in
Bitterroots for
Idaho.
sure. The Selway. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
ever heard of the Selway, but there could be 1,000 Sasquatch in the Selway, and we would have no idea. You
It
want to
is
talk about
like
scary,
rough.
dude?
Yeah.
That is, yeah,
Almost impenetrable.
100.
Those are
Yes,
places that, since you said Idaho, it made me think of that. Those are places that, as you point out, it's like, all right, yes, we have all these hot spots, but there's this premise where, I'm going to misquote this, but I'll stay general. There was a study during World War II where planes, they were trying to figure out how to armor planes the best. So what they looked at was the planes that were coming back where they were shot was in like the fuselage and the et cetera, and they were making it back. So they figured out that their wings were getting shot up, for example. But the evidence was showing them that the planes were getting shot in the fuselage. So a common sense would say, oh, I need to armor the fuselage. But in all reality, they needed to look at what the evidence, the antithesis of that. Look where the evidence isn't showing you. Look in between the lines, and that's
because those
what
planes aren't
draws.
making it back.
Exactly. Look at the planes that aren't
Yep.
making it back. And to me, that's like, all right, what checks all the boxes, but for some reason on the map, why isn't that a hot spot? And that screams to me it should be a hot spot, but it's so hard to get to and hard to penetrate and hard to navigate that I think that is prime territory for
Yeah.
Bigfoot. Like you said,
Oh,
it could have a Bigfoot utopia there. We would never
yeah.
know.
We have no
So
idea.
yeah, that's one place that's been on the top of my list. I even made a map about it. I'll send it to you. I highlight the road density, even how dark it is in America. It's one of the darkest places in America. Interesting to me, that area. And you were saying the Selway. So tell us more about it. And then we're getting close to time, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I'd love to hear more of that and then maybe get into anything else you want to cover.
You nailed it. You just described the Selway and the Bitterroots crash into each other. If you wanted to try and get into there, your best bet is probably to try and do it by river because it's just so impossible to get in there on
Exactly.
foot.
And who does that?
This would have to be a very serious expedition with very experienced, skilled people and a lot of good gear because yeah, you can get in there, but to get a mile off of the road is a very good feat of accomplishment. Even with horses, you're going to have a hell of a time. And it's hard to explain unless you've done it. I
Mhm.
grew up in Kentucky. When I grew up in Kentucky, I didn't have an understanding of what these mountains were like because my understanding came from the Appalachians. And so when I think mountains, I'm thinking Eastern Kentucky, like coal country and like that. But then I come here and I'm like, oh my gosh, like we're not talking about the same thing. These are
The grade
very
is
different.
ridiculous. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so big, and it's not just big on one side. You go up, you climb several thousand feet, vertical feet up, and then when you come to the other side, you're going several thousand feet back down. And then it's
Right.
crossing rivers. It's very loose granite and loose rock. It's dangerous.
And that's there's how many places like that in North America, right? Where people will probably have never set foot because they are so hard to get to. Things can remain hidden. And I think that goes full circle to what we were talking about, where Bigfoot is going to seek those places out because over the thousands of years or hundreds of years or millennia, it's learned that we are a threat. We humans are dangerous. We have pointy things. We've had pointy things for thousands of years that
Yep.
we are not afraid to use. If you look at it that way, where's Bigfoot going to go? As far away from us as possible. And granted, there are incidental sightings, as you point out, and then there's people that are coming across these areas that are hikers or hunters or people that are just in the right place at the right time. But overall, I just want to emphasize, as you did, there are so many rugged parts of North America that are untouched, unexplored, virtually unmapped that Bigfoot could be. And I think you've given us a lot of good advice over this. Actually, it's been an hour already. It really doesn't seem like it.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I'm looking at the timer. I'm like, wow, it's been an hour. But you are a good guest to come on and help us take all the skills we've learned from various other experts and then start to transition to using them in the field, right? Because you do that and you can help us understand how to do that. I've learned some things through the episode, and I hope that my listeners have too. I'm going to wrap it up and make sure that you get to plug your new show. A. I tried not to talk about it that much because I know that you're probably like on this whole media blitz. I don't know how that works. Maybe you can explain some of that. And then again, anything that you recommend to people starting out, resources that you use, of course, aside from bigfootmap.com, and then anything that you just want to put out there, promote, say to anybody, please, just the mic is yours.
Yeah. I love what you're doing because one of the absolute best Sasquatch stories that I've heard from someone who I trust and I look up to was from Florida. And if you would have told me 15, 20 years ago that there were going to be some really good Sasquatch sightings out of Florida, I would have probably laughed and been like, dude, there's no way. It's a black bear. It's a
I would have said
black
that.
panther
Yeah.
or a black bear, right? But that's what I love about what you're doing is you're taking these experiences, these stories, all these different things and compiling it in a place for people to access, because it gives stories like mine and people like mine the confidence to speak out and not just be like, am I crazy? Did I actually see it? We're actually able to create a community of people. And the fun thing about that is you don't have to come to the Pacific Northwest to have a Bigfoot sighting. You can do
No.
it in Florida. You can do it in Tennessee. You can do it in West Virginia. You can do it wherever. And so I did want to say thank you, because you're giving away, unifying everybody and giving people a voice. Like,
Oh,
so
that's really
thank
nice.
you.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
It is an honor to be able to take some nerdy skills that I have in GIS and translate them to something that provides some confidence, hopefully contributes to the community. But I really appreciate you taking the time to say that.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing about the TV show, because this was actually a really cool, actually Sasquatch related too.
Oh, really?
So
Okay.
yeah, and so what was so interesting? So I filmed this TV show. It's season 1. It's on Fox Monday nights, called Extracted. The exciting thing about this is Fox wanted to put a lot of money into this show, and Balboa Productions, which is Sylvester Stallone's production
Oh,
company,
really?
he's one of the executive
That's awesome.
producers. A lot of time and resources and money went into this show. And so the idea is essentially that there's a team of 3, and one person gets dropped off into the wilderness with nothing, like just the clothes on their back, and that's it. And then the other 2 people in the team of 3 live in a headquarters. And at the headquarters, they're competing in these different trials and challenges. And depending on how they do, they can send supplies out to the person in the field. A lot of people, when I tell them that, are like, "Oh, like Hunger Games." I'm like,
Yeah,
honestly, yeah, it is like Hunger
it sounds
Games,
like it. Yeah, it
minus like
does.
killing each other.
Yeah. Although
And
that would
so
get some ratings, I think.
there's 12 teams that compete in this, and we just had episode 3 on Monday. And through this point in the season, there are now 10 families left. Okay.
Okay.
So what's so interesting about this is I wish I could remember the exact number, but I think it's 350 cameras in the woods. And then they had live feed capabilities to be able to feed the video back into headquarters. So we were
Hmm.
able to watch in real time and hear our survivalists.
Hmm.
And I've seen a lot of comments online about, oh my gosh, another staged fake reality show, blah, blah, blah. I can tell you, I was there. It's not staged. This is not fake. These are amateur survivalists with 0 or next to 0 survival skills being put out in the woods in Canada. And there are bears, there's mountain lions, there's wolves, there's all kinds of things. And this is very real. There is a lot of risk here. No, there wasn't. The rescue team was like on the other side of a lake that they would have had to
Yeah.
like load up, get across the lake, and get up. It's
An
at
hour
least a
away,
half
2
hour
hours
away.
away.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. And so all these people online that don't know what they're talking about, I can tell you, I was there. And
Mm.
so the thing that we talked a lot about going into the show is they asked me a lot about my understanding and belief of Sasquatch, because they're like, hey, we're going into this area where there have been sightings. People say they see them from time to time, whatever. What would you do if you guys saw something? What would you say? What would you think? How would you handle it? And because this is really one of the first times where I've ever heard of that many cameras in that small of a proximity being put
Right.
up and being able to live stream. Did we see anything? Unfortunately, no, I didn't see a Sasquatch. But
Bummer.
the idea of being able to do that is really exciting to me. Like, just
Yeah.
I'm thinking about big picture, long term for the future, that the capability, technology is now getting so good that we're able to do some of these things. And in some of these hotspot places, in some of these trails or water holes, caves, some of these things that are hotspots, that somebody with enough money and the right resources could do a project to where we were able to get live streaming video where an alert could pop up that you could jump in and look at live feed and see, oh my gosh, a grizzly bear came out of the cave or whatever.
I think we just
It was,
found Fox's next show, honestly.
trust me, I will sell that. It was the most fascinating thing to be a part of. I learned so much. It was such a great experience. Every time the wildlife alert alarm would go off, I would just be sitting there, please. And they'd be like, oh, that's another bear walking through someone's camp. Darn it. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
wild.
But
That's,
yeah,
I
it
mean,
was
that's
pretty wild.
the premise of that show. Actually, that's very interesting, the premise of the show, the way you describe it, because essentially that's some of what I'm trying to accomplish with the listeners, right? They're out there, and I'm sure many of the listeners know quite a bit more than I do. I don't want to downplay or whatever, right? I'm sure there are tons of knowledgeable people, but I look at it as through this podcast, I'm back to make an analogy. I'm back at HQ, and I'm hopefully giving them advice on how to survive and how to be successful out there. And that's really interesting the way you describe the show. They need shelter, for example. How do they build? Where are they going to build? What are they going to do? How do they start fire? All these things that people, especially if they're novice survivalists, probably are like just looking out there. You want me to do what? Rub two sticks together? How? Or you want me to do, there's so many things that humans through our evolution and our history instinctively knew and taught and passed down that we've lost. And I think that's a very interesting thing that this show probably highlights is just how helpless we've become in a lot of and comfortable, right? We are so comfortable. Me and you are talking thousands of miles away across the internet right now. That's impossible for most of human history. And so I think it highlights just how comfortable and how far we've come. It sounds really interesting. I've watched a lot of it. I haven't watched episode 3. I think
Well,
it's
I make a
Anthony.
huge mistake. I make a huge mistake in
Do you,
episode 3.
do
And
you?
I got to tell you, they set me up pretty dang good to fail. And yeah, you'll have to see episode 3. I make almost cost us big time. But yeah,
Eesh.
they set me up pretty good, but we made up
All
for
right,
it.
I'll ping you when I watch it. That's funny.
You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah,
I'm definitely
great.
gonna watch that episode. But I watched Anthony, right, the guy that's the professional fisherman, and he's complaining about the
Yeah, yeah,
fishing line, and he's, who would send me this the fishing line? They gotta be brain dead. I'm like, oh man, there's some good
yeah.
drama on
I
that show
know.
too. It's pretty funny. I
Well,
gotta
we're,
hand it to
we're
you.
just
I'm excited to see how that turns out. I hope you win, by the way. Good luck. I hope that as the season develops, we realize you guys are winners. That would be really cool if I was interviewing you now and you were one of the
yeah.
winners. Fingers crossed. I just want to say thank you for being willing to come on the show, for really sharing some of your expertise, good advice, sharing your experience with Bigfoot and what was going through your mind and why you're confident sharing it. I think the audience hearing that, it's very, the word that comes to mind is comforting, but it's reaffirming for them to hear that somebody with your knowledge and experience can sit in front of the camera and say, that was Bigfoot. And to see somebody willing to say that brings decreases the stigma attached to that of having a sighting, sharing it, and maybe they'll be more confident to tell people and share it. Because I go to work some days and people are like, oh, Bigfoot guy. It's like, all right, come here on lunch and sit with me and let's look at the map and ask questions. And I've converted so many people at work. They're like, Bigfoot? If I never met you, I never would have thought Bigfoot was real. And
Yeah.
I guess I'm some kind of Bigfoot evangelist, right? But oh,
Me too. It's okay. I'm the same way.
hey, who would have thought? But I just want to say and acknowledge that coming on and sharing your experience, it's not always going to have positive influence on your career or how people view you as a person and your credibility or whatever. They do judge. So for you to do that on the podcast, I just want to say thank you. I think it's a
Of
pretty
course.
badass story because you had a really good 30 seconds, it sounds like. A lot of people don't get that.
Yeah.
So
And
thank you for
I have
that.
a witness with me.
I
That's the
know.
crazy. My wife is so crazy. I'm so lucky.
So you can, yeah. So you both can be like, remember that? And we weren't crazy. So it's, thank you for sharing that. And then all the other things we talked about, I really appreciate your time. I know you have a family, so thanks for taking time away from them and coming on the show. Yeah, thank you so much.
white snow, red sky, reach up so high, blue